We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
Not only will this tax plan pay for itself, but it will pay down debt.
There are moral and legal obligation questions that I think we'll have to wrestle with as a society.
When we as people go wobbly on the truth, we go wobbly on America.
All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done.
And this is all in the beginning.
From 100.9 FM WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. Evidence of Design is a live talk show about the political economy. We critique income and wealth inequality and support democratic values. Thank you for listening, and welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and hopefully you can hear me. Welcome to 100.9 WXIR. This is Evidence of Design. I am your host today, Matt Treadwell. That's right. It's my time to shine. I'm here with Mary. Jason's not in the studio today. He's busy with something. I don't know. But we are, in Jason's place, joined by a special guest, Abigail McHugh-Griffa. I'm sorry. Abby is a... Do you prefer Abby or Abigail?
I don't care.
You don't
Either
care.
way.
Abby is the executive director of the Rochester People's Climate... Hang on a sec.
Coalition.
The last one. RPCC, and we're going to be talking about that today. Abby, if you could give us a brief introduction of what RPCC is and the work you do there.
Mm-hmm. So we are the coalition, the organization that coordinates climate action in our region. So, climate change is a big and complex problem. So there's a lot to think about. So a lot of stakeholders need to come together, and we are the ones who try to get everyone in the same room and get everyone on the same page and move things forward.
And as I understand it, you have over 30 organizations?
We actually have well over 30. We started out with about 30 member organizations 5 years ago. We then got up to about over 130. Then we changed to a new membership model this past January, in which we asked members to pay dues and actually make real commitments to, doing climate-friendly things. And now we're at about 67 organizations.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, and how did you get involved with RPCC?
Well, I'm one of the founders of the organization, and it was back in 2014. I mean, we are right now at our 5-year anniversary.
Oh yeah, happy birthday!
Thank you. It is. I mean, it is this month, where a group of organizers came together representing various climate, environmental, and social justice focused organizations in town to organize 2 buses to go to New York City so Rochesterians could participate in the first People's Climate March.
Okay.
And so that collaboration was so satisfying and successful that we kind of, didn't want to let it go. So we came up with, we started calling ourselves the Rochester People's Climate Coalition right then. Honestly, we didn't think through the name too long and hard. Maybe we would do it differently because it is rather a mouthful. If we would have known, what the future held. But we've spent the last 5 years kind of taking that initial idea and growing it and expanding it, and we've really found it to be just so much more impactful when we work together rather than being in our own little silos, kind of stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah. Do you have some examples of the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, so, our member organizations, there's really quite a range. Of course, there are the climate environmental focused organizations, Sierra Club, our local Mothers Out Front chapter, our local Citizens Climate Lobby chapter, Color Bright and Green, the ones you would expect. Then there's also quite a few businesses, some of which are in the renewable energy or energy efficiency field. And then there are other businesses that have nothing directly to do with climate change, but are just supportive. Thinking, for example, the Body Mind Float Center. So some Old Stone Tavern. So some random ones that just, they believe in our mission and are there supporting us. We also have a lot of faith groups, a lot of different faith groups, neighborhood associations, civic associations of various different kinds. So it's a wide range.
And what is the sort of criteria for people who are looking to, like an organization that wants to join RPCC?
Mm-hmm. Well, all that is on our website, of course, all the gory details, of which there are many. At this point, we're really asking for a commitment to advancing our mission, right? And what that means for any one given organization may look very different from another organization. For example, a business that owns a physical facility can do things for our climate that a grassroots bunch of, organizers in their living rooms cannot necessarily. It'll look very different. So we meet with each of our member organizations on an annual basis to sit down and identify some concrete goals of how they can be contributing. And again, looks different depending on what kind of organization it is.
Yeah, that's, I guess I'm thinking about the differences of, you mentioned, someone who has like a physical building can do one kind of work, whereas people who are grassroots organizations can do different kinds of work. I think it's really great that you sit down every year and look through, because I think it's pretty common to maybe do that once at the beginning and then not revisit, but that's really wonderful. What are the differences, like the different kinds of impacts that those types of relationships can do?
So I think it's important to understand, first of all, where our local emissions come from.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our buildings and the transportation sector in our region are the two largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions.
And does the transportation sector include private cars, or is that okay?
Yeah, definitely. So both of those, are where we focus a lot of our attention and advocacy. I can get into some more details on that. But, with the building side, to upgrade the energy efficiency of your building, get a heat pump instead of a traditional furnace or boiler. These are the kinds of investments that organizations that have a physical building can be pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a grassroots organization is really more about mobilizing people, typically.
Yeah.
And education awareness, lobbying to some extent, of course. So again, depends a lot.
And is it all local, or is it, are there any members that are outside of the Rochester area?
Yeah, so our geographic boundary is a little loose. We say Greater Rochester region, but I'd say most of our member organizations are in Monroe County, but we do have some that are further afield. There was another part of that question I was going to answer, but I forget what it was.
I was asking what the difference, what different things that those organizations could do, like what can a grassroots organization do versus what a building can do, or an organization that owns a building can do.
That was not the part that I was going to answer.
No.
But that's
sorry.
okay. That's okay.
Maybe we'll think of it later.
Yes, I'm sure. If it was important, it will come back to us. But yeah, the geographic region that we're looking at is this Greater Rochester region. As we move forward, we are broadening the scope a little bit in terms of geography, mainly because climate planning makes sense in a larger region rather than a smaller region. Again, things that the city of Rochester can do in isolation. I mean, there's a lot that the city of Rochester can do, is doing, a lot of good progress. But if that's not incorporated into a larger regional plan, the ability to be effective is limited, especially when you think about transportation and development and some of these questions.
Yeah, and I do think a lot about transportation. We've talked on the show a few times about the impacts of transportation in different ways, and some of them being climate related. You did mention that, one of the criteria when you're building new partnerships is that you want those people to forward your mission. Can you talk about what your mission is as an organization?
Right. Well, we're really focused on inspiring and facilitating this large-scale climate mobilization in our region to identify and implement effective climate solutions that will move us toward carbon neutrality in a very quick time frame. There's the most recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the IPCC. It's the international body kind of convened through the United Nations that it's thousands of climate scientists, climate experts from around the world who come together to
came out late last year.
Yeah, right. October of last year. This most recent report that said we have about a decade to get global emissions under control, and that's scary, obviously, because we are quite far off from that place, right? There's to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. There's just so much that's going to have to happen. And, and then looking to be completely carbon neutral by 2050. Thing is that in the Rochester region, we are actually positioned to move forward on this more quickly than many other regions will be able to, just based on, a lot of ways in which we are fortunate here. We feel as a coalition that we need to be more aggressive in our region maybe than some other areas of the country or the world will be or can be. And that really that's our responsibility.
Okay, and I'm imagining some of those would be like our access to fresh water. Maybe we don't have very many, natural disasters here. I'm guessing that's some of those reasons.
Right. So those are some of the reasons that it's just good to be a Rochesterian these days. But the thing that's really to our advantage, or the key point that enables us to move forward more quickly, is that our electricity grid is already the cleanest in the nation. Actually,
Really?
I know. Nobody knows that.
No.
And everyone's like, no way, it can't be. No, but it's true. Now, I will a little caveat there. It's that most of our electricity comes from nuclear, which of course nuclear, there are reasons to be concerned, but climate change is not one of them. All right. So we've got this, the bulk of our electricity is already carbon free. And that puts us well ahead of regions that are currently generating their electricity from coal, or other fossil fuels. So for us, not that we don't need to continue to invest in renewables. We absolutely do. But what we really need to be focused on is electrifying our transportation and our buildings. So this is where our Go All Electric campaign comes in, which I'd be happy to talk about ad nauseum if you'd like. But
yeah, I haven't heard about that campaign.
Right. So we've been working with Causewave community partners and a steering committee of representatives from, I think, 16 fairly prominent organizations, in our region, including, of course, RIT and U of R and Chamber of Commerce and Empire State Development, a whole bunch of them, around this idea that we need to get the message out about beneficial electrification. And this is, again, one of those things most people have never heard of, beneficial electrification. And if you don't know what it is, you can't pursue it. But it is the idea that we have these energy needs currently, most of which are being met by fossil fuels. And since for us in our region, our primary source of emissions are transportation and heating of our buildings, those can be switched to electricity, which can be generated from renewables or other carbon-free sources. And so this is how we're going to dramatically reduce our emissions. So, people know about solar panels. People get excited about solar panels. Solar panels are indeed great, but we need to be talking about heat pumps. Which no one knows what a heat pump is, right? But that's actually where we're going to get the most bang for our buck in this region. That and electric vehicles, electric buses, and of course public transit and active transit.
Yeah, we do talk a lot about public transit on here. Matt, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm curious. You mentioned earlier, Abby, that the goal in terms of how large geographically RPC is trying to be is to sort of get a little bit bigger, but maintain sort of the, Rochester identity. Is the objective with that to sort of reach a certain size and then present a model for other people to follow across the country?
Well, we'd love for other people to follow, of course. And actually, one of the ideas with this Go All Electric campaign is specifically that, since we are positioned to do this quicker, that we can move forward with that. And then others will be able to follow that example. I'd say right now, most of my attention is certainly just focused on right here, right now in Rochester. What are we going to do?
Sure.
And hopefully we'll get it right, and then the rest of the world will just, want to follow along. But yeah, in terms of the region, thinking about carbon neutrality, I don't know how familiar you are with the idea of carbon neutrality.
I'm not
what
familiar
that
with that term.
Okay. So basically, that the amount of carbon or carbon equivalent emissions that you're putting out there, you need to balance out by removing or producing clean energy, right? So you achieve net zero. Maybe net zero is a term you might be more familiar with. So one of the benefits of thinking regionally is we, for example, have all this agricultural land, and that's where you can start talking about sequestering emissions. One of the best things you can do is, plant a tree. So it's the best technology out there for removing carbon from the atmosphere. There's lots of other technologies that are kind of in development, none of which are financially or viable at this point, but trees and organic agriculture, those we know how to do and we can do them right now. And so when we think about planning, right, just regional planning, we need to think about density, keeping people kind of closer together so we can keep that open space available for sequestering carbon. So these are some of the issues that would come into why we'd want to think a little bigger in terms of regional.
Something interesting I'm hearing from what you just said, the idea of carbon neutrality is not necessarily to have zero emissions, just to have enough going on that's taking away from those emissions that are happening. Is that correct?
We want to be striving towards zero emissions, no doubt about it. But there's going to have to, on the path there, we're going to have to be thinking about finding that place of net zero or carbon neutrality. And then, I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a book, Project Drawdown. It's a really exciting work that's out there talking about then how do you actually go negative in terms of, but it's a journey, right? It's going to take a while. First, we've got to get to net zero, and then we can start thinking about going beyond that. And it's fortunately, all of the technologies we need, it's not brain science, like the technologies exist. It's even policy-wise pretty clear what we would need to do. It's just a question of generating the political will to get it done.
Yeah, and I guess generating political will has a lot more to do with getting people educated than anything else. I do want to take just a quick break and remind listeners that you are listening to 100.9 WXIR. We are Evidence of Design, and today we're talking to Abby from the Rochester People's Climate Coalition. If you want to participate in this conversation, you can actually give us a call. We're live in studio. Phone number is 585-219-8889. You can also reach out to us via email at radioeod@gmail.com, tweet us at radioeod, or you can find us on Facebook. Guess what? Radio EOD. So we'll get back to this conversation, but please don't hesitate to join in. Give us a call, 585-219-8889. Abby, I have a question about how you fund the projects that you work on. You mentioned having membership dues, which is relatively new, but what other ways are you able to support these projects financially?
That is a very interesting question.
Oh boy.
So, no, until recently, we actually didn't even try.
Wow.
We were all volunteer run until September of 2018, so just a year ago. And really up till that point, and we only became a 501c3 2 years ago.
Okay.
So we were a legal non-entity for the first few years there, just, very authentically grassroots organization. And we formed the 501c3 specifically because we realized that to achieve what needed to be achieved, we were going to have to be able to, pull in some resources and put people to work. You can't save the world in your spare time after you go to your other job. That just doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable, right? So we formed the 501c3 in order to bring in the resources to do more, and have since then been trying to figure out, well, how do you fundraise, right? Because none of us had background or experience in that. So I became our first part-time paid staff person just under a year ago. Since then, we've brought on another 5 part-time people, and we're about to hire 2 full-time people.
Wow.
So we've actually made pretty great progress. We did learn that once you start asking for money, people are more inclined to give it to you, which is really nice. We just never asked before that. We are grant funded. One of our projects is funded by a New York State grant. Actually, I suppose 2. We've gotten some private family foundation grants as well. And then we've, do an occasional kind of online campaign. Right now, in fact, we happen to be sort of celebrating our 5-year anniversary by doing a little fundraising campaign, and are very fortunate to have some matching funds for that. So we would very much encourage people to chip in right now, which of course you can do online or by sending a check.
And while we're on that topic, where can people find the website to do that?
Yeah, it's rocpcc.org, so rockpcc.org.
All right, so if anyone's listening and has a computer right in front of them, you can do that right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening and I have a computer right in front of me.
Don't hold back. But yeah, we recognize that the scope of this problem is going to require some serious bandwidth, and fortunately, I think our community is really stepping up. Rochesterians recognize that this problem is real and we need to do something about it, and they're clearly willing to support that. So we've been very fortunate in that regard.
They is in the city of Rochester, or the
city of Rochester. We are working with them on one particular project. So we have that has been a financially helpful arrangement for us. We are a subcontractor on a grant that they got, kind of thing. And then also that the city is just, in terms of regionally, they are leading this. There's some really great people working for the city of Rochester who care very deeply about these issues and are putting some serious energy into it. So.
Okay, and we'll get into some of those specific issues in a little while, but I'd like to ask, for listeners who may not know how to talk about the climate crisis, like how can we as a community discuss climate change and what we as individuals can do about it?
So I think, first thing is to recognize that we have all contributed to this problem in some way, and probably, I know myself included, I still continue to contribute to the problem, even though I'm very aware and very concerned, because the system that we live in is set up. Our whole economic system runs on fossil fuels, basically. And to participate in normal American day-to-day life at any level, you're going to be part of the problem. So the first thing I would say is we need to not be pointing fingers and doing sort of the shame blame thing. This has been a very politically polarized issue. And obviously, fossil fuel companies have a lot to lose if we make this transition to clean energy. So there has been a very deliberate campaign of misinformation and doubt spread. So, that there is still climate denial out there is obviously frustrating. But it's also very understandable that people are confused because we have been intentionally misled. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist like by nature, but I think this one's just pretty well documented that yes, in fact, the science was covered up by Exxon, and by these fossil fuel companies. So yeah, people still aren't sure what to do. And, I mentioned the example of heat pumps. People don't, I myself just a few years ago dumped a whole bunch of money on a brand new natural gas furnace, the highest energy efficient natural gas furnace you could buy, and a tankless hot water heater. And I thought I was doing the right thing. Yeah. And it turned out I was totally wrong. And I was already someone who really cared about this and was, quite involved. So we need to not be shaming each other for the things that we are doing that aren't perfect. I know some people are very passionate about plant-based diet, veganism. Some people are very passionate about not driving a individual car. Some people are very passionate about not having children. There's there's so many different ways that you can reduce your carbon footprint, but none of us, I'm sure, is doing all of those successfully. So to recognize the things that people are doing well, appreciate those, and continue to educate about where we need to be headed.
Is there a sense, Abby, in the work that you do that you mentioned that climate science denial is still very much a thing, but is there a sense that maybe that is going away, or that people are more receptive to the idea that people are having an effect on the environment? Yeah, absolutely. At this point, over 50% of Republicans agree that climate change is real and that we need to do something about it, right? So that's major progress. The deniers that are still out there are a small minority. They do happen to be a very vocal small minority, of course, and some of them are in very influential positions in our society, so that doesn't help.
But absolutely, I think the climate denial piece is going away. We need to actually just kind of stop talking about, is it real or is it not real? Because it's quite well established that yes, it's real. And what we need to be debating are what are the exact solutions that we're going to pursue and the nuance behind that. Because it is a nuanced conversation. It's not it's not black and white. And there's a lot of different things that are going to have to play into this to get us to where we need to be.
And why is collective action so important for this, for this argument or this discussion on climate change?
No, because of the complexity of the issue, right? No one organization or individual could possibly solve this on their own. It just touches too many areas of our lives, and there are too many policies that will need to be changed, and too many, just infrastructure development things we're going to need to be talking about, as well as the education piece. So, there's just no one entity out there that has the power to do it all. There's some really important first steps that, for example, our government could take. Price on carbon being foremost, on the top of my list anyhow for that. We have this market failure right now, right? Polluters can pollute for free, and the rest of us, pick up the bill, in disaster relief and healthcare costs and all of these things. So until the cost of using fossil fuels is part of, is tied in, and that would be through a carbon tax likely, we're going to continue to have this imbalance that is really hampering progress.
Yeah. And let's talk about some of the cases, some specific situations that you're working with. So we have here that there is a rate case that you've been working on with RG&E. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is?
I would love to talk about that. The rate case, this is another one of those things where we are very much learning all the time, what the levers are that we need to be pulling. And so, RG&E is a public utility. They essentially have a monopoly. They've been given the right to have a monopoly, to operate as a monopoly, but with the stipulation that they will be regulated by the Public Service Commission. So this rate case thing that happens typically every 3 years is when RG&E wants to raise rates, they have to go to the Public Service Commission and ask permission to do so. And it starts this legal proceeding that is, in theory, supposed to be, very transparent and open. And the thing is that it's incredibly, incredibly wonky and actually not that easy to engage in because there's just thousands of pages of documents to review, and it's, kind of some very technical stuff. So it's hard for just your average concerned citizen to be involved in any kind of meaningful way. So we just, I guess about a year ago, we heard that this rate case thing was coming, not really knowing exactly what it was or what it meant, and we were like, oh yeah, I think we should probably be involved in that in some way. So this shows our naivety. We budgeted $1,000 for the year to support our participation in the rate case. Well, we have since learned that is just nowhere near what it actually requires. So we now do have someone working for us who we are officially intervening. We are interveners. We've signed up to be a party. There's different ways that organizations and individuals can participate, but being an intervener, basically what it means is you are privy to the negotiations. You can be there at the negotiating table as this settlement will be developed. So, RG&E wants to raise rates, the Public Service Commission oversees them, and then all these other organizations that have some kind of stake can also be involved, and we are one of those. And some are, looking out for our climate. Some are looking out for the interests of low-income ratepayers who, energy bills can really be a burden. And then some are looking out for corporate interests. Those are kind of, the primary voices who are part of this. Each of which maybe has some overlap in agenda, but also some places where they would certainly not agree. So we've been looking to build a coalition around the places where climate issues and economic justice issues do intersect, which there are most certainly examples of that. For example, the heat pumps. RG&E is going to take over the incentive programs from New York State for the heat pumps. The way they would like it to be structured is that it will only be available for customers who are currently heating with oil and propane.
They being RG&E?
RG&E, right. And that makes sense for them, right? Because those would be new customers for them. So that would be income that they wouldn't otherwise have, right? So that makes tons of sense. Not to mention, oil and propane are, in terms of climate impact and health impact, they are worse in some ways, depending on how you look at it. I'm going to say this with all kinds of caveats.
Yeah.
Than natural gas. So RG&E would like to switch people over to natural gas. We would very much not like them to switch people over to natural gas. And so what we'd like them to be doing is transitioning people directly to heat pumps instead, and to have these heat pumps be available not just to people who, have a lot of money available for that upfront investment, but to others as well. We'd like to see that the heat pump incentives be based on income level, for example. Also, people who are struggling to pay their bills, if someone's at risk of being shut off, we'd like to see them automatically referred into energy efficiency programs. Because, instead of just kind of throwing money at it through HEAP, we can actually reduce those people's bills over the long term by improving the house that they're living in, right? And so that is, to us, a better investment of those ratepayer dollars. And so it's all kind of a numbers game, right? This is RG&E's budget that we're talking about. And we're all trying to make sure that the things we prioritize are where the investment goes.
And I should have asked you this earlier, but for people listening at home as well as myself, can you tell us what a heat pump is exactly?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so a heat pump is a heating and cooling technology that basically operates the same way as your refrigerator. If you've ever, so this is not like a newfangled technology. This is actually something that's been around for a very, very, very long time, but has gotten to the point where in our region it can heat your home. And provide air conditioning. But so if you've ever, put your hand behind your refrigerator when it's running, it's a little warmer back there, right? And the reason is because it's taking heat from inside the box and putting it out, which results in this nice cool space that can keep your food fresh. So heat pumps basically do the same thing. They extract heat from either the ambient air outside or from the ground and move it into your house. And in the summer, they do the reverse. They extract the heat from your house and move it outside. So that's where you get the heating and the cooling. And so these are super efficient technologies because they do not actually create heat. They just use existing heat. So it's very efficient, and they run off electricity. So when we talk about that go all electric idea, they don't require any fossil fuels to run. You just plug them in, and if you have a carbon-free source of electricity, then ta-da! That's where we need to be in terms of reducing emissions.
Do they tend to be invasive? Are they large or?
No, not at all. Okay, so there's. I don't know if you really want me to go into all the details on this, because there are multiple different types of heat pump. There's air source heat pump. There's ground source heat pump. Ground source, you may have heard of geothermal.
Yeah,
that's what a ground source heat pump is.
Okay.
And the air source, you see them more and more all the time. There's the mini split units where you'll see them up on the wall. They're kind of like these. Usually white. Yeah, you look them up. Mini splits, and then there's also the kind that would just be in your basement and hook up to your ductwork like a regular furnace. So various different kinds, but all the same basic technology.
Okay.
So when we're talking about the rate case, and you're talking about raising rates and, the ways that affects people with different incomes, what kind of money difference are we looking at when we say RG&E is trying to raise rates? Is it like per month, just a few dollars, or what does that look like?
Well, it's funny because it actually just changed. And I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. You'd have to talk to our rate case person. But, what it's looking at right now is that it is, going to, on both the electricity portion of the bill and the gas portion of the bill, that it would go up a few dollars a month. In NYSEG territory, actually, which they have the same parent company, so it's the same case that's going on right now. Theirs is supposed to go up $11 a month on I think it's the electricity portion.
Okay.
That's just the electricity portion. So for them, that's really significant. The other thing that's important to know about this is the difference between the fixed charges and then your actual what you pay for usage.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a real equity issue, because the fixed charges that we pay right now for I think it's electricity. I can never remember gas versus electricity, but is almost $22 a month, and that's before you've even turned on your lights, right? So for someone who has a higher income, that $22 a month isn't not that they'd want to just shell that out, but it's not a big deal. Mm-hmm. But for someone who is working with, really limited financial means, that's a big chunk of money without having even used any energy. Yeah. And we all pay that same fixed charge. So
no matter the size of the house,
no matter the size of the house.
Wow.
That's just the connection to your house. And we have a fixed charge for electricity and we have a fixed charge for gas.
And you mentioned that RG&E, as a monopoly, there are no other providers and no other option.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow.
I know. So there are, and I should also mention that almost $22 a month, that we have the highest fixed charges in the state. And some of the highest fixed charges in the country. I think it's in New Jersey. They're paying $3 a month on the fixed charges. So wow. It's not that it has to be that way by mm-hmm. any stretch of the imagination. It's just how it is currently, and that's why we need to be getting involved in this process.
Yeah.
I think it's a good time to take a quick break, maybe, for music.
Sure. Yeah, we have a song set up. And so, Matt, go ahead. Okay, welcome back. And while we're coming back, who was that, Matt?
That was Stereolab with the song Percolator.
Percolator, just like the coffee that I would love to have right now.
Oh, yeah.
So while we're taking a break, just wanted to let you remember that you can call into this conversation. We're talking to Abby from the Rochester People's Climate Coalition. This is Evidence of Design on 100.9 WXIR. Give us a call at 585-219-8889. And again, you can reach us by email, Facebook, or Twitter, all at Radio EOD. So, Abby, we wanted to jump into a little bit of a conversation. We've sort of touched on this in talking about the RG&E rate issue, I guess. But maybe we can talk a little bit more about, this connection between the housing crisis and the climate crisis. How do those affect one another?
Mm-hmm. So, housing is both a primary source of our contribution to the climate crisis right now, and also a primary opportunity for us to make a difference. So in terms of, how it contributes, of course, a lot of, you look around the city of Rochester, and you don't have to look too far to see that we are wasting energy in our buildings. I mean, sometimes it's as obvious as there are broken windows, or the windows are wide open in the middle of winter, right? Things like that. And sometimes, you have to be in there and experiencing the drafts, or we hear lots of stories, people needing to, for example, heat in the middle of winter by using their ovens, if they don't have, you haven't heard that, no?
I think I've heard that before, but I never really think of it as being a regular option.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's, what the majority of people around are doing, but it's certainly something that happens. You may recall, I think it was it 2 winters ago, the building on South Ave with the ice, they had the ice on the inside of the windows, right? And so there are a lot of, from a health perspective, that exposure to extreme temperatures is not healthy. And that goes for winter and summer, right? It's been getting hot around here. In July, it was really hot. And that's a health risk. And when you're living in a building that doesn't have proper ventilation, or, a lot of low-income residents might not have air conditioning. I don't have air conditioning. Yeah. And I'd say it was last summer was the first time I ever really wanted air conditioning. And again, this summer, we're starting to see kind of where things are headed with that. But, people's energy bills, this is another great example. We talked about RG&E rate case, but Governor Cuomo, a year or two ago, set the goal that no New York State resident would pay more than 6% of his or her income for energy costs. And according to a NYSERDA study from not that long ago, very low-income New Yorkers are paying somewhere more in the neighborhood of an average of 19%.
Wow.
I know. And there's all kinds of different factors depending on heating, fuel, depending on, what kind of housing unit it might be that could impact that. But we can simultaneously address the climate crisis and some, the economic crisis, and just make people more comfortable, which, there's something more comfortable and healthier, those two real things. And when you start talking about health impacts, that has costs associated with it, not just in terms of actual trips to the emergency room and how taxpayers need to pick up the bill for that, but also missed days from work. And, another great example, burning fossil fuels in your home just is not that healthy for you.
Right.
Sorry.
No worries.
So, the beauty of the climate crisis, if there is a silver lining, right, it's that by implementing effective climate solutions, we can improve people's lives right now, today, and then also make them more, resilient and able to withstand the impacts of climate change in the future. And housing is such a key piece of that. I was reading actually just the other day through the City of Rochester's Climate Vulnerability Assessment. A couple of years ago, they did their climate action plan.
Yeah, we've talked about that on the show before.
More recently, they did a climate vulnerability assessment. Right now, they're in the process of doing a climate resiliency plan. I don't actually think that's what it's called. I think it's called Climate Change Resilience Plan or something like that. And by the way, they are right now collecting feedback. They have a survey that people can fill out, to share their priorities and visions for the future. But in terms of that climate vulnerability assessment, it very clearly lays out who are the vulnerable populations in this. Some of them are, obvious, who you would think would be vulnerable, but then there are some also who may be less obvious. Children are vulnerable for more than one reason, right? Children are less able to regulate their body temperature.
Absolutely.
Right? So not only, we have certainly a problem with children living in poverty in the city, that contributes, but children just by their very nature are less resilient to climate change. So we need to be thinking about that in terms of the settings that we put them in. Are there school buildings? Do their school buildings have air conditioning as temperatures rise? All these, there are so many questions, and this gets back to what you're saying earlier about why is a collective impact approach important? Because again, we have to be thinking about so many different, there's just so many touch points in terms of how we can make a difference.
And no one organization can obviously keep track of all those things.
No way.
You've used the term eco-apartheid. It was in a Facebook post actually recently, in an article that was posted on the RPCC Facebook page. What does eco-apartheid mean, and what can it mean for the Rochester community?
So, people of color in general are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, both globally and here in the United States. That's pretty well established. It's not. There's nothing controversial about that statement, really. When you think about some of the, for example, low-lying Pacific Island nations that are literally going underwater. Who's living there? And, things like a lot of the regions that are dealing with serious drought, civil unrest, due to climate impacts, things, our news media doesn't always do a great job of connecting the challenges that are happening around the world to climate, how the globe is warming and how, when drought and famine are happening, what conditions that creates and the movement of people that creates. Our region, we touched upon earlier, is expected to be a fairly good place to live in the future. Our weather is relatively stable. We do have these big bodies of fresh water. So it's more likely for our region that we're going to see an influx of population. And that could be really beneficial for our region, right? We've seen people leaving, in the past, and this can be our opportunity to grow and reestablish kind of the vibrancy of this community. But that could go well, or it could go very poorly, depending on how we're planning for that process, depending on what structures are in place to support that, and make sure that that we remain welcoming. That's a lot of what it comes down to. We've certainly seen that with immigration, there are some pretty scary, frightening responses to migrants happening in different parts of the world, and we need to be planning for what this is going to look like in the Rochester region, and making sure that we can be welcoming, and that Rochester can not only get through this, but even thrive.
Yeah, that was actually something I was thinking to bring up. We've talked about that on the show before, where a lot of politicians, particularly those running for the 2020 presidential election, talk about immigration a lot, but they don't connect it to climate change, and the fact that climate change is only going to make that issue more relevant as people have to leave areas that are overheating, in such as the hottest July we've seen on record last month.
Yeah. And those people are, going to come from all over.
Absolutely.
New York City's, without some very major infrastructure investments, they're going underwater. And again, we have to be having real conversations about this, and not playing into some sort of the fear mongering. yeah, it's, we can do a lot now to slow global warming, but we've got enough carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at this point that temperatures will continue to go up, sea levels will rise, and we need to be talking about what that means and how we're going to peacefully get through this.
And maybe that's a good point to transition back to something we talked about earlier, which is what we as individuals can be doing right now.
Mm-hmm. So I'd say individuals can be pushing for systems level change. Yes, I think all of us, when we first start thinking about climate issues and what we can do to make a difference, we think about our own day-to-day lives and, kind of those, how do you reduce your personal carbon footprint things. And I would absolutely encourage people to take those steps. Sure, drive less, eat less meat, get the heat pump, whatever it is. But we also need to recognize that in and of itself, even basically if all the individuals do that, businesses and government are the primary contributors to the problem. Mm-hmm. So we need to be talking about their emissions. And yeah, there's various different ways we can go about having that conversation. I think locally we've actually really seen businesses stepping up and showing an interest in doing the right things. Now it's tricky. They could do it faster. But, for example, we've developed a really nice relationship with a local chamber of commerce. They are interested in helping the business community be more sustainable, helping our region, I hate to use the word brand itself, but that's the word that comes to mind, mm-hmm. as, a green, climate-friendly place to be. And as an organization, RPCC is 100% encouraging of that, right?
Absolutely.
But the reality is that big business, especially, and the government, our military, for example, a lot of emissions coming from there, and we need to be, as individuals, getting on the phone, calling our elected leaders, talking about the policies that are going to push our entire economy into this clean energy future, rather than just thinking about, what can we do in our own personal lives.
So you mentioned earlier, Abby, that, there's a lot to be fearful about in regards to climate change. We have, the number's been thrown around for a few months now, that we have about 10 or so years before, if we don't reach carbon neutrality, as you put it, if we don't reach carbon neutrality within the next 10 years, that we will face catastrophic, unalterable change to the planet's atmosphere and ecosystems. Are there reasons, are there reasons to be hopeful, or anything that you can say to be optimistic about in regards to the future regarding climate change?
Yes. My level of optimism really depends on the day. Some
Mm-hmm.
days I'm more optimistic than others. And, in terms of the timeline, even, the scientists aren't 100% in agreement about exactly how much time we have and exactly, so yeah, there's this 10-year marker to keep global emissions under 1.5 degrees Celsius, but some would say we need to be even more aggressive than that.
Sure.
Some are really talking about what are the carbon sequestration technologies that are going to come along that can kind of reversing. There's the future is uncertain, and it will continue to be uncertain. But I think what really gives me hope is seeing local people really step up, who it's not like it's their job, it's not what they do professionally, it's mm-hmm. people who care and are concerned and love their children and grandchildren, looking to make a difference. And as an organization, what we want to do is make that process easier for people and help them to be effective in that. I know when I started getting involved in this, I decided I wanted to be a climate activist, right? And I had no idea what that meant. I literally Googled it, and Google wasn't all that helpful. And it was hard at that point, little over 5 years ago to even find out what were the opportunities to get involved locally. And I would like to think that now, several years later, that if someone wants to do something, they could, quick Google search climate volunteer opportunities Rochester, New York, could come across quite a few things where they can get involved with organizations or various different work groups that are working on specific issues, and to find a place where they genuinely enjoy themselves. I think what's kept me doing this work is one, fear for my children's future, of course, but also that I made these wonderful, wonderful friends. Like, it's the coolest people are doing this work. And so it's tremendously satisfying to be involved in this and to deepen your understanding of the issues and of what it means to be an effective advocate for the climate. We're not born as advocates, so we do have to learn. But that's a very rich and rewarding process. And I see more and more and more and more people doing that all the time. And so that's where I feel hopeful. And of course, not just in Rochester, but globally, I'd say people are getting serious. So.
10 years ago, I attended the Adirondack Youth Climate Summit in Tupper Lake, I think in the first or second year that it existed. And one thing that just this brought to mind was this one quote that stuck with me. I think it's by either Paul Hawken or Phil Hawken. Paul Hawken, yeah. That hope only makes sense when it doesn't make sense to be hopeful. And I think that's kind of what you were just saying brought to my mind is like, in some ways, we don't really feel like we should have a sense of hope, but in that case, it's more important to have it. Like, we need to be hopeful, even though we're facing a lot. In the last couple minutes that we have, I remember that being such an essential moment in my interest and care about the environment. Are there kinds of outreach opportunities that people can connect with you?
Well, so I want to follow up exactly on what you just said with that youth thing because, first of all, we do have the Rochester Youth Climate Leaders, which have been around for a couple of years. They have an annual summit, which is based off of what they've been doing in the Adirondacks for quite a few years more than that. And there's this team of quite a few youth, but also other organizations and supporters that are working to organize around this global climate strike event and Rochester's participation of that. So people keeping their eyes and ears out for that. The week of September 20th to September 27th, there are going to be some exciting things, and especially save the date for the 27th because I think there's going to be a big happening here in Rochester that's going to be very exciting. And so, people stepping up, taking action. Also, I lost my train of thought again, but so many opportunities to get involved right on our website. You can look, we have a volunteer intake form. We have little descriptions of some of our member organizations that are doing this work. We can literally match make people with their skills and interests to volunteer opportunities that would be satisfying. So I'd suggest people just check that out.
All right. And any last words before we sign off?
Not from me.
Not from you. All right. Well, thank you, Abby, so much for joining us on Evidence of Design today. It was wonderful to have you as a guest.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And Jason, we missed you today, but
I miss him.
Okay, well, I missed you today. But Matt and I were your hosts for today's episode of Evidence of Design. And we hope to see you next week. Give us an email or a tweet or a Facebook message in the coming week if you've got anything to add. But
all of that at Radio EOD.
Radio EOD. And we'll see you next week. Be well.